If I bring you a customer, what should you give me? How much of that sale do I deserve? 80%? 50%? 20%? 1%? Let's talk about sales commission. Welcome to Cheeky Sales Coach, episode 16, Sales Commission Basics. Today we're going to talk about sales commission and kind of give you an overview from two different perspectives. One is as the salesperson and another is as the company owner or sales manager. These two perspectives are actually in opposition to each other naturally. One person is going to try to take as much money as they can. The other one is going to try to give as little money as they can. So they're naturally in opposition to one another. One of the interesting things about sales commission and sales people and sales programs and sales commission structures is that sales people are very different from most of the employees of a company, especially in a knowledge worker environment. If you haven't read Daniel Pink's book, Drive, you should absolutely check that out. Pink talks about how people are motivated by autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And in many, many situations, most people are not motivated by a little extra money. In other words, if you've got somebody who is earning a good enough salary, right? Let's say somebody's just, above what they really need. So that might be 50, 60, 70,000, depending on who they are and where they live. But whatever it is, they have enough so that if you say, hey, will you work late on Friday? I'll give you 25 bucks. They're probably going to say, no, thanks. I got stuff to do. Even if what they have to do is to sit in front of the TV and watch Netflix. Now, if you said, I'll give you $1,000, well, that might be a different story, but little bits of money here and there don't generally motivate most people. But salespeople are not most people. Salespeople are motivated by money. Salespeople, by their nature, are people who are motivated by money, and that has some consequences for how you must treat them and how you structure your sales commission programs. The term of the day, obviously, is sales commission. Sales commission is simply a payment system or structure that is based on paying someone based on a percentage of the sales price. Just between you and me, there's two obvious sales prices. You could use gross sales, right? So let's say something sells for $100 and your profit is $40. So you could base commission on the $100 or on the profit. Okay, so one option is the gross sales. The other option is the profit from that sale. So do you give somebody a percentage of the gross or a percentage of the net? That's something you have to figure out. There are other sales commissions. Some things are based on numbers, the number of new people who sign up, the number of licenses sold, the number of contracts signed, that sort of thing. You got to figure out what makes the most sense, but we're going to give you some general guidelines about figuring out what's fair in the big picture. Before we talk about what's fair, let's talk about whether or not you can afford to pay sales commission at all. In my opinion, most very small business owners cannot afford sales commission, and we're going to walk through a little bit of why that is. In particular, if you think about a full-time salesperson who has to make enough money to feed a family, to pay a mortgage, to make a payment on that Rolex or whatever, they need a certain amount of money. No matter how you base your commission, it has to be paid from profit. It can't be paid as part of the ongoing expenses of delivering service. let's look at some possible sales commission options and see what you think is fair. As we go through this, I would love to have you look at your average sales. Just go run some QuickBooks reports or Sage reports or whatever, Xero reports, and find out what an average sale looks like. And this might be a normal thing you sell every day, or it might be a big project, like you're going to sell a project that is 50 hours of labor and a bunch of hardware and a bunch of software and whatever. So you figure out what we're talking about and then look at the actual numbers as we go through this. Many people consider 25 to 30% a reasonable commission for most service industries, especially those who have some mix of service plus parts and labor and so forth. How do we get that number? What does that look like? Well, that would be a percentage of the profit. Okay, so 25 to 30% of profit, which for most companies is going to be in the neighborhood of 10% of gross and say 25 to 30% of profit are pretty normal, right? And just think about it in an example. Let's say something costs $100, 10% of gross would be $10. Let's say that you're 40% profitable, so profit is $40 and 25 to 30% of that is going to be in the neighborhood of $10 to $12. So it makes perfect sense, right? Those are pretty good numbers. Why do some people get paid a bunch more? For certain programs, you might pay a whole bunch more, but one of the big variables is if you get a lot of returns, then you expect to pay a higher percentage of the actual sale. So let's say somebody gives you, they somehow manage to give you 3 sales at $100 a piece. Yay! And so they're hoping that their commission is going to be $50. Woohoo! Okay, here's what happens. 2 of those are returns. So the actual sale turns out to be 1 sale, right? So if you're giving 50% of that 1 sale, somebody actually had to complete 3 sales, right? It's not their fault that somebody returned it. Well, maybe it is. We'll come back to that. But what happens is that when you have high returns, like you're selling whatever, food supplements that have a very high return rate, people want their money back, right? Well, if you're doing that, then you have to give a much bigger amount of money. If you have a legit business where you expect a salesperson to be with you for 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, well, then these numbers are going to be much more normal. And the reason is fundamentally they're sustainable. And there's a few gotchas that we're going to talk about, but basically you got to make sure that you have a sustainable system. If you pay too much as the owner, you're going to go out of business. If you don't make enough as a salesperson, well, you're going to either go get another job or you're just going to give up because you're starving. Back to the math of making sales. So let's look at somebody who wants to make $100,000 in salary, which is not unreasonable for a good salesperson. $100,000 is 10% of $1 million. So the question is, how do they get that money? Because you have to now deliver $1 million worth of goods and services. Is that reasonable? Is that practical? Is that something that you can actually do? What would it take for you to add $1 million extra dollars? Let's say your company is currently doing $1 million, okay? You're talking about doubling the size of your company. How many people do you have to hire to do that? What does it take? What kind of structure does it have to take? What kind of scheduling does it have to take? What kind of new equipment and software do you have to buy? Okay, let's say you're a $5 million company. That is still a 20% increase in the gross of your company. How are you going to do that? What is involved in actually delivering that? So you see, if you hire somebody and you want them to earn $100,000, it structurally changes what your company looks like. Now, let's assume that's all for the good. So if you want to do that, that's cool. Just go down that road. Just know that an entire sales structure becomes a part of what you absolutely have to do inside your business in order to be successful. Next, let's talk about base. Base pay is something that you pay to salespeople so that it evens out their cash flow. Because for example, let's say that somebody is paid their commission monthly. Well, if they want to earn, let's say they want to earn $10,000 a month, okay, but they have to have money on the first day of the month. They got to pay their rent, and then they have other expenses as the month goes on. How do you even that out? Well, you start with a base pay. So let's say we're going to pay them $3,000 a month in base pay. So $3,000 a month, they're going to get probably 2 paychecks of $1,500 each. There will be deductions and so forth from that, and then the rest will be on commission. Normally, the way this works is that you pay the base, and it is literally just a down payment on the commission. So a good salesperson will be all commission. They will want to be all commission because they can ask for more at the end. At the end of the day, the salesperson's perspective is the more money I make, the more money you make. So let me make as much money as possible. And that makes great sense, although, again, there are some snafus that come on down the road. So a base plus commission starts with certain payments that are literally down payments. Let's say that you've got a decent salesperson who is essentially guaranteed. It's never guaranteed, but they're really good. They never have a month that's under 10,000. So giving them a base of 3,000 a month is very easy because they will always be able to make more commission than that, right? So you're not really putting anything on the line. It's making their cash flow a little easier. You can't make that base an actual salary unless you are willing to pay a salesperson to do nothing. Let me just slow down and repeat that. You cannot. No, I'm kidding. If you give someone a base pay that is not part of commission, it is just money they get paid as an employee to keep them coming to work every day, you will be paying them some money to not make a sale. Now, obviously, it's not going to be enough for them to live on. Let's say that you give them $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year. They can't live on that, so they're going to go make sales. But if they don't make any sales, you will be out that money. So be very, very careful about this. Bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is your sales commission shouldn't look much more complicated than this. One of the problems that companies get into is they have very complicated sales structures. They have layers and levels and all kinds of stuff, and everybody's earning something different, and everybody's got a different scale, and it's hard to track, and then people get into fights, and you spend this overhead of 10% of your time arguing about sales commission. Sales commission should be very straightforward, and then you will have fewer problems. Now, once you get to be paying somebody $50, $60, $70, $80,000 or more in sales commission, you're going to completely ignore my advice, and that's okay. This video isn't really intended for you. Okay, as long as we're talking about motivating people, let's make sure that we don't mismotivate them. When I say mismotivate, here's what I mean. Very often, people are motivated to change their behavior by certain sales incentives or sales commissions. Here's what that looks like. Let's say that you are, I don't know, Dell, and you have internal salespeople, and they get a piece of the action whenever a big sale is made. So they look and see that partners, for example, might register deals to make sure that they can capture the commission on that. You have motivated your salespeople to take those sales from the partners in order to have them for themselves. Because you have motivated the salespeople to behave in a way that is not necessarily in the company's best long-term interest. I'll give you another example. Several years ago, one of the major cable TV providers in Sacramento, California, had a promotion where they said, hey, I see you're just paying for internet, but if you will take TV plus internet, we will give that to you for no extra charge. All you have to do is say the word yes, and we will ship you a router. And I said no. And they shipped me a router. Why? Because the salesperson got a commission for that behavior. So I called them and I said, you have to come and get this router. And they said, oh, take it to the UPS store and drop it off. So I did that. And then we argued about the bill, and eventually everything was squared. And the next time I talked to somebody, they shipped me another router. They didn't even ask. Why? Because that's what they're motivated to do. They're being paid to exhibit that behavior. Second time, I said, come get your router. And they said, take it to the UPS store. And I said, no. You dropped it on my front porch. I'm going to leave it on my front porch until either somebody steals it or you come get it. I don't care which one. Have a nice day. Poorly motivating your salespeople will lead your company to do things that are not in their best interest. So you need to be very careful about that. Remember, salespeople are not normal. Nothing personal. Most people are not motivated by money after they earn a certain amount. Salespeople are, by their nature. So there's a financial relationship here you cannot ignore, and you need to use it to your maximum benefit. Just final note on greediness, because here's what happens. Money eventually leads to greediness. If the salespeople are greedy, they will participate in all kinds of behavior that just puts money in their own pocket. For example, in order to make that $1 million worth of sale and $100,000 in commission, they might sell to customers who are not good customers for you. And the result is those customers only stay for a year, and then they get out of their contract and they go do something else. So the next year, you're paying that salesperson to replace customers that should not have been sold in the first place. But they don't care because they're more interested in the money than the company. Switch it around, companies also get greedy, and what happens very, very frequently is they look and they see that their salespeople are among the best paid people in the company, and they say, we have to do something about that. It's not clear to me why they need to do something about that. If I give you $10 and keep 90, trust me, you can do that all day long. But what happens is it gets to be a big number. You know, when you look at 2 or 3 salespeople at $100,000 a piece, pretty soon it adds up to real money. And so the owners or the sales manager want to say, well, let's reduce that cost. And so they come up with a new structure. What does that look like to a salesperson? Well, it looks like you just took a bunch of money out of their pocket. Well, that's not good. You need to think very carefully about how you put together your sales structure. I personally recommend that you make it as simple as you possibly can, make it honest and forthright, but also have a huge discussion about motivation, about company goals, about the company's mission, and make sure that your sales process is totally focused on achieving the long-term goals of your company, not just the short-term goals of the finance manager or the salespeople. I hope you make a whole bunch of money this week. For the Cheeky Sales Coach, this is Carl Polachuk, wishing you the best of luck in everything you do. Call to action. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss a thing.